Everyone, welcome. I'm Katie Couric. We have a great panel to talk about really restoring trust in the Fourth Amendment, and I'm really honored to be joined by this illustrious group. Let me introduce everyone. We have Gerard Baker, Editor-in-Chief of the Wall Street Journal, and Joanne Lipman, who's Chief Content Officer of Gannett and Editor-in-Chief of USA Today. We have Nikhil Deogun, Editor-in-Chief of CNBC, Nancy Gibbs, the Editor-in-Chief of Time Magazine, and Jeff Goldberg, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic. We have too many chiefs on this stage, don't you think? But welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. Okay. So we have 40 minutes to talk about a lot of things, so let's get right to it. This is a good day to have this conversation. The cover of the New York Post this morning, CNN, most busted name in news, following the story where 3 reporters were forced to resign. The media is still buzzing about a confrontation between a White House reporter and Sarah Huckabee Sanders about fake news. Sarah Palin is suing the New York Times. And the president tweeted 3 times just this morning accusing the New York Times and the Washington Post and implicitly threatening Amazon and considering those newspapers of being fake news. And Nancy, you're trying to get the fake Time magazine covers emblazoned with President Trump's face taken off the walls of several Trump golf clubs. What a world. So, real quickly, since this title is about restoring trust and less than 40% of the country says that the media can be trusted most of the time, I'd like to go down the line and ask each of you to briefly explain how we got to this place. Jerry, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Katie, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. I should start off by saying that was a very helpful litany of the current woes that confront the media, and I should say straight away that I'm an optimist, by which I mean I see the glass currently as 1/10 full rather than 9/10 empty. Look, I think, and we'll have an interesting discussion, I'm sure. I do think that the media, first of all, we like to talk about nothing else more than the media, which probably is a reflection of our own insecurities and psychological problems that we have ourselves. But I do think clearly there has been, as you cite that poll, there has been a diminution of trust in the so-called mainstream media. Not a phrase I like, but it resonates. People know what it means. And I think it's important to see that in a very long-term historical context. It would be wrong just to think that fake news that's come up in the last couple of years, or Donald Trump, or for that matter, Breitbart or Fox News, or any of these organizations that probably you here all are not terribly big fans of. It would be wrong, I think, to just suggest or believe that those are the problems. The problems go back much deeper, and I think there has been, unfortunately, a steady decline in trust in the media because a very large part of this country has not felt served by the main news media for a very long period of time. They felt that they deal with those issues that are interest to the media and to the people, the media elites on both coasts, and they don't deal with the issues that confront most Americans. And I think it's that has driven the decline in trust over a long period of time.
And we're going to get to more of that in a few minutes on this panel. But Joanne, quickly, what do you think?
Yeah, just to pick up on Jerry's last point. So at Gannett, so we own USA Today and 109 local newspapers, local news organizations like the Detroit Free Press and the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Des Moines Register. And to your point, what we see is at the local level, you do still see trust in the media. And that's because you've got local reporters who are ingrained in their community. There's a lot of forgotten voices, and particularly with the national media, which, as the media has been under pressure, has really retreated to the coasts. And you've got the entire middle of the country, many people feel underserved. And so from where I sit, where we have both a national publication and the locals, you can see that at the local level, where there's local reporters whose kids are going to school with your kids, where your concerns and worries and thoughts are reflected in your local media, it makes all the difference.
Nick?
I'll be somewhat brief since I'm watching the clock for you, Katie.
Thank you, Nick.
As the TV guy over here.
Thank you.
But I would pick up a little bit on what Joanne said in that, and what Jerry said in that. I don't think the media is as monolithic as people make it out to be. We're lucky and blessed at CNBC in that all our research has shown is that our credibility has never been higher, our brand position has never been stronger, and the reason for that is we stick to what we do. We cover business and we cover facts and data, and that's what we deal with day in and day out. And on the back of that, we've had strong results, and our digital platform is growing tremendously. At night, we're essentially more of a, we do more entertainment program focused on entrepreneurship, but that resonates with an audience. So I think it's a bit of a mistake to say the media at large and people have lost trust in it. There's also a proliferation of media. And so some of it is, this is the, as a capitalist and a free marketer, this is also the marketplace working, where lots of people have different opinions over different types of media.
Right. Nancy?
All I would add is this is part of, as Jerry suggested, this is part of a at least 50-year, go back to 1967, 68, at least a 50-year diminution of trust in institutions, not just in media. You see it in the organized church, and certainly in elected politicians, in business, in leadership, almost across the board. And with that, the enormous transfer of influence from institutions to individuals. And so now that everybody, we are living in a time where everybody can be a publisher, can be a citizen journalist, can express their views and do their investigations and be part of a conversation in a way that was never possible before. It is keeping everyone honest in a way, challenging us if we get something wrong, pushing us in outside of comfort zones. Much of that is a very good and healthy thing. None of us likes to be the objects of the kind of antipathy and active hostility that we encounter now. But I also think some of it reflects the fact that there is no monopoly on authority and information anymore, and there is a virtue to that that should keep us humble and respectful and responsible in the way we go about our business.
Jeff?
Well, everything that was needed to have been said was said, but not by me, so I'm just going to repeat it. Let me make a very, very quick point, which is I'm going to sound very optimistic, I think. And our experience at The Atlantic over the past months has been that, and we're a 160-year-old organization, we've never had more readers than we have right now in digital, tens and tens of millions of readers. And think about this, in subscriptions, print subscriptions, we've never had more print subscribers. Think about how deep we are into the digital age. We've made a bet. We made a certain bet, and it's based on the idea that the scarcest commodity in journalism right now is quality, and that there are millions and millions of people in America and across the world who want quality journalism. I think we're being rewarded for that bet, and so I take that as a sign of the health of democracy and the health of quality journalism.
And a shameless plug for the
Atlantic. Wow, that was particularly shameless, by the way.
Jerry, fake news is often used as a mantra by the president to describe stories he believes are not true or stories he simply doesn't like. How effective has this mantra been, not so unlike Lyin' Ted or Crooked Hillary, in discrediting the mainstream media and planting seeds of doubt in the minds of Americans everywhere?
I mean, I don't think he has created a mistrust of the media, for what we just said, without just
Don't you think he's exacerbated it?
He's certainly done a very effective job of reminding people what they don't like about the media. Look, I do think we have this phenomenon now, and Nick touched on this a little bit. You do have a plethora of media. You do have different views represented. You do have the situation, though, where people choose their own news, in effect. They choose their own facts. There was Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the great New York senator, used to have a great line, which he said, you're entitled, in an argument, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. These days, people basically are entitled, they think they're entitled to their own facts, so they choose their own facts. So what Donald Trump does very well is to play on the reservations that people, putting it mildly, reservations that people already have about, be it the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, or whatever, and actually it becomes an even more partisan issue. So he does a very good job of actually diverting attention from the facts, if you like, just to say to people, look, if it appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or CNN, you don't have to believe it because it's not true. And I think many, many people are actually willing to go along with that.
And Nancy, in fact, Time Magazine did a very provocative cover recently asking, is truth dead? And what motivated that cover? And you have sort of an interesting backstory, if you will, about putting it together.
We actually reached out to the White House to talk to the president about this question, about the accusation that his treatment and vision of the truth was unlike any that we had seen in a president ever before, and that this had become such a central topic of conversation of what does it do to the national conversation when we are not able to agree even on the facts of the size of an inaugural crowd. And he agreed to talk to us for that story, and some weeks after that cover appeared, the reporter who wrote it and I had dinner with the president at the White House and talked about that story, which he liked. But no, the important thing is he liked that story because he felt that it gave him a chance to make his case. That in fact, you know, when he talked about these terrible violence in Sweden, that had turned out actually to be true because the day after he tweeted that, there was actually a big demonstration.
But that was after the fact.
He points to any number of occasions when nobody believed him, including that he could actually win the White House, and that he absolutely believes that there are things that he knows and sees that other people don't know and see.
And did he discuss all those illegal voters on election day that kept him from winning the popular vote?
No, but we talked about the size of the inaugural crowds, and I think that question of all of the issues around, you know, true and false, the inauguration sort of became the iconic one. And literally standing in front of a photograph of the inauguration as he pointed out where the crowds had been held back by the Park Service barriers and where they were actually bigger. Maybe I am misreading something, but I would swear that he genuinely believes that his inaugural crowd was bigger, that he is not lying. The reason we all have debated about the use of that term,
and we're going to talk, yeah.
He wants credit for something he thinks he's not getting credit for. And I think it is important with any president to be mindful of the way they are perceiving something and what they believe. That's an important part of making a judgment about their administrations, their policies. And so in this case, I come away absolutely believing that he continues to come back to the size of the inaugural crowds because he believes that his were in fact bigger.
And we're going to talk about sort of the use of the word lie in journalism in a moment. But Jeff, when the president constantly tweets that different newspapers are examples of fake news, like the Washington Post or the New York Times, and accuses reporters of being fake news at White House briefings or when he appears before reporters there, what's your reaction?
Well, part of my reaction is that we're all engaged in a reality TV show, that this is a reality TV version of a war between a president and the press. And I mean that in one specific sense. Right now, we're all benefiting. The weird part of this is, of course, when the New York Times and the Washington Post get tweeted at this way, their subscriber base goes up, right? More people subscribe and want to support them. The problem is, and this is what I worry about more than anything else, is that there are people in the country who don't understand that this is a cynical reality TV game, and are going to hear over and over again from the president that the reporters, journalists, are enemies of the state. And someone, I mean, God forbid, but someone is going to do something violent against journalists in a large way, and then I know where the fault lies. And we're heading in this direction, and it's quite frightening.
But in a less dramatic way, what about just the erosion of credibility and believability and people feeling that they can trust in any way, shape, or form, the newspapers they're reading?
Well, I don't think that beyond his base, these tweets have the influence that we're talking about. The problem is that there's two Americas, and one America, which I think is slightly larger than the other America, believes more or less, understands that journalists are flawed, but believes what these newspapers are telling them, what we're all telling them, and then there's another portion that won't believe it. The real problem, besides the problem of prospective violence or prospective anger gone unchecked, the real problem is that in the Trump presidency, nothing really has happened yet. Remember, there's been no Katrina, no Sandy, no San Bernardino, no Orlando, and when you have a crisis, you need two things to be. You need the people of the United States to believe in two things: one, that the president is telling them the truth, and the other is that they're getting accurate information from the media. This is being eroded, and that's another serious problem.
Can I add one more point, though? Because I really feel that when the president talks about the press as the enemy, it's really important, it's on us, the press, to not set ourselves up as the enemy, to not believe, because our role is to be a watchdog, our role is to seek the truth, our role is not to be, at least in my view and in my organization, is not the opposition party. There are publications that have set themselves up in that way, but I think that part of the issue of trust is your audience needs to understand that you want to seek the truth, good, bad, or indifferent. You need to understand the facts and present the facts to your audience and allow them to make their own judgments.
Let's talk about using the word lie. David Leonhardt in Sunday's New York Times listed all of what were called President Trump's lies. So I know everyone on this panel has an opinion about the use of that word. Jerry, I know that earlier this year you said you'd be careful about calling the president's statements lies because it implies, quote, it implies a deliberate intent to mislead. So do you think he's careless with the facts? Do you think he believes what he's saying? How do you explain it?
Well, so what I think is not really important, and you know, David Leonhardt can write articles. I think the president probably lies a lot, right? I mean, I think the president makes things up at times. I think I've got, you know, a fair amount of reason for believing that. The difference is not what I think or what I express as an opinion, what even I might be given reasonable grounds to believe. It's whether my reporters can report those things as fact. And if you're going to report something as fact, that something is a lie, you have to know that it's not only an untruth, it's not only a falsehood, you have to be able to impute motive. You have to be able to impute two things in the mind of the speaker: one, knowledge that it is actually untrue, and two, a deliberate intent to deceive. And I can see circumstances, perhaps, where I would have enough evidence that Donald Trump, or indeed anybody else for that matter, that that they have enough evidence, they should have enough evidence to be able to know that it's truth, and that I would therefore be able somehow to infer from their deliberate falsehood that they were telling a lie. But it's a pretty high bar, and it doesn't just apply to lying. By the way, our reporters, we're very careful about imputing motives to people without the evidence for the motive, and we are very strict about this. We don't impute jealousy or hatred or various other things. It is a judgment, making a call about whether or not someone's lying. Again, I don't rule it out completely. I said I'd be careful about it, and I think most people should be careful about it.
Jeff Goldberg is scowling.
No, I'm naturally scowly. No, that's just my default scowly face.
That's your resting scowl face?
No, my resting scowling face. Thank you, Katie. No, I actually think it's okay to say that when you present a president with a set of facts about, let's say, the inauguration size, and you show him diagrams, and you show him how many people fit within a grid, and you've shown him this over and over again. You've made that information available over and over again, and months later he's telling you that he had the largest inauguration in history, or larger than Obama's. At a certain point, we have to treat him like an adult and say, this is a lie. He continues to lie about something that is provably untrue. I mean, it's not, and by the way, now, all politicians lie. This is not a unique situation we're in. It's exaggerated. The other thing I was thinking about was something that Nancy just said, which is, I remember years ago, I interviewed Yasser Arafat twice within a 48-hour period. In the first interview, I asked him if he thought a two-state solution was possible, and he said, yes, absolutely. 48 hours later, I asked him the question again, and he said, it's not possible. I think he was telling the truth. I think both times he was telling the truth. And so there's this cognition issue that we have to deal with, which is, I think you're right. I think he believes the things that he's saying to be true in a genuine way. He's being honest with himself that he thinks the lies are true. You know what I mean?
And the reason I think that's so important is because, anyone can sort of police statements, and fact-checking will always be a fundamental part of any news organization. But at a higher level, what a president believes through our history has led this country into war and taken us out of them. It has led a president to commit to putting a man on the moon. It is enormously consequential what a president believes. And so it seems to me if we ignore that piece to only focus on the empirically provable truth or falsehood of a statement, we risk missing an important ingredient in understanding where we're likely to be going as a country. And
can I just say, it's also something, it's all very well for Jeff to talk about the president, but it is something then that we as news organizations would have to routinely apply to statements that are said. Chief executives lie, they mislead, they misrepresent. All politicians that we've just said lie, mislead. You know, God help us, members of the media sometimes actually lie. Are we going to be in a position where we are going to have to test every single statement that's put to us, not on the grounds of truth and falsehood, which is what we should do and what we do, but actually in an attempt to understand the intent and the motivation of the speaker? I think it's an extraordinary burden to place on us. And in the end, by the way, I don't think it really actually matters hugely, because if you demonstrate, as we do, President Trump says something, these are the facts, we can demonstrate that these are the facts, we can demonstrate that he had probable reason to know the facts. What do we actually further gain for a skeptical reader? A reader who still at that point isn't prepared to give it the appellation a lie. What do we actually gain by saying, you know what, so actually it's a lie, and now you'll be convinced that it's a lie? It's people want to apply this to this president. He does speak a lot of untruths, I've absolutely no doubt about that. But if you think about the consequences of that, we would be required to make that moral judgment, that judgment about whether or not someone was deliberately misleading in every single story we did. And and I just think that's an impossible burden.
But you do think people should be called out when it's clear, like
Absolutely.
when LBJ was lying about Vietnam for years, and many lives were lost as a result. If the media had called him out sooner.
New York Times didn't do front-page stories saying he lied. They did front-page stories saying this is what he said, these are the facts, probable reason to believe that he should have known the facts. We've now decided that we just routinely will call what somebody says a lie. I just think it's a very high standard that you have to apply to everybody.
Let's move on and talk about sort of the bifurcated nature of the media these days. You know, it's consumers are increasingly gravitating toward outlets that basically tell them what they want to hear, reinforce their beliefs. A friend of mine said they're seeking affirmation, not information. So given that, how do you restore trust in the media writ large if people are so divided about which media outlets are actually fair and accurate? Anybody? Nick, you want to take that?
Sure. And I would say that I think Jerry made a very eloquent argument on the previous point, and it leads to what you're asking about, which is, I think there is a tendency, we should not fall into the trap of just holding one person to one standard and everyone else to a different standard. I do think it's interesting, three of us have all worked at the Wall Street Journal or work at the Wall Street Journal, and
I did before I left the office.
Yes, exactly. And our former Jerry's predecessor, a couple of predecessors ago, Paul Steiger, used to always remind us, saying, "Look, I could argue something round or I could argue it flat, but in the end, stick to the facts." And I think sometimes there is too much of a tendency to interpret a fact to a degree that it goes into opinion. And I think part of our job is to, again, remind ourselves that our readers are not as readers, viewers, users, are not as ignorant or stupid as we think they are. And I think part of that is to be more transparent. Part of that is to be more forthcoming about what we know and what we don't know. The first rule we all learned is don't just tell your readers what you know, please tell them what you do not know. And I think that's important.
But getting back to sort of like, you know, hearing the news you want to hear, is it going to be ever thus? I mean, is objectivity, true objectivity, in some cases simply not as desirable as it once was? People want journalists or you know, analysts, whatever, to have an opinion and to pick a side.
I think that there's a couple of things.
Certainly on television, increasingly in cable, right?
Well, I think there's again, it's not all monolithic. There are media is a business. If people are going to flock to a certain thing, you're not going to stop them from doing it, right? I mean, so that's a certain piece of it. But I do think, Jeff raised this, quality does count, and quality does attract subscribers, and it does attract advertisers, and in the end, you do believe that quality wins out. And I think you have to hold to that belief.
Can I also point out, though, that there's a lot of obsession here and in the media with what's going on at a minute level in the White House. In real life, people have other concerns, and so there is a venue to bring people together. There is common ground for people in other ways. So, you know, of our 110 publications, half are in red states, half are in blue states. So we're hearing from and talking to and giving a platform to people from many, many different viewpoints. And so they have many, many different interests. So there is I think we're in a moment in time. I also think that these things are cyclical. I mean, if you go back 100 years ago when there was yellow journalism, and you know, you can look at the newspaper wars that were very similar to the ratings wars and the click wars that we have now. It led to lots of irresponsibility and lots of lying and lots of, you know, nonsense, and ultimately burned itself out. There's a cycle to these things.
And you know what's interesting? I read a piece not long ago that a lot of people, I think the media itself gets so obsessed with sort of cable news. And so many people don't watch cable news, which I think if you're in the business, you find shocking because so many people we know are watching it. And yet, sorry, Nick, a lot of people don't get their news and information that way. They get it from local papers, they get it from USA Today, they get it from their local news stations as well. So it's not as influential. And maybe that's one of the reasons, Jeff, that President Trump's base is really sticking with him in some ways. They're not being influenced, or are they being reinforced by, say, Fox News?
I suppose so. I don't know how they're getting information much better than you know how they're getting information. I would say social media obviously is the X factor here. I mean, you have the ability now to curate your news feed in a way that you never had before, and I think people can seal themselves hermetically away from things that upset them in a kind of way, and so I think that's and what social media is democratizing, and that's great, but it has allowed anyone, I mean, you could be an 18-year-old in Estonia writing fake news that works its way into the system, and you can't expunge it from the system, and so our defenses are being overwhelmed in a kind of way.
Let's talk about social media and sort of, obviously, there's a lot of pressure to feed the beast, right? To not only file your story like you did in the good old days and wait for it but to constantly tweet, retweet, analyze, put little pieces of information out in social media. Do any of you worry that reporters that were, you know, normally straight reporters, kind of down the middle reporters, are being much more opinionated on social media, and do you have to keep an eye out for that?
Well, we have a policy about not voicing opinions, not voicing political opinions in any of your social sites.
But certainly you've noticed, Joanne, that a lot of people do. And Jerry, do you have a policy? And do you ever say, hey, easy trigger, stop doing that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, one of the problems, we use social media to promote our stories, obviously, which is very beneficial to us. The problem comes when reporters and occasionally some editors decide to take to social media and the problem is obviously social media is so much of a kind of forum for the expression of opinion, and it's very easy for reporters who are there supposed to be dealing with the facts and not with opinion to get caught up in that. And we have occasional problems where reporters will be out there expressing opinion about a story. They'll post their own story, or they'll refer to another story and then offer an observation about it.
Yeah, it'll be a whole echo chamber of discussion among reporters.
But they have to understand how much that undermines the reader's trust. It's all about the reader or the viewer for me. And if a reader or viewer sees a story by a reporter which purports to be objective, purports to be an account of the facts, and then sees that reporter on Twitter saying, by the way, Donald Trump's an idiot and should never have been president of the United States, they're never going to trust anything that reporter writes again about Donald Trump. He or she will have completely undermined the trust that the reader has in him. So we really, this is the peril of not only social media, but of the way the media generally has gone for the last 50 years, that reporters are not content to report anymore. They want to be expressing opinion. They want to be shaping the news. And that's fine, but the cost of that is exactly what we're seeing today, which is the diminution of trust, the elimination of trust by so many people in reporters. And frankly, it's hard to blame them.
And Nick, I know that's something that has concerned you.
We talk about it all the time. I think whenever new reporters come in, I do a little training session, and I tell them two things. One is, when you're on social media, you're still broadcasting, you're still representing the brand, and it's very hard to do quality journalism in 140 characters. It's very hard to do a lot of things in 140 characters. And I'd say the second part is, in the quest for speed, just remember that speed can kill, and that you're all rushing to be first, as are we, as is everyone else. But an old editor once told me, it's way better to be late than be wrong. And I think that's a cardinal rule I think all journalists should live by. It's better to be late than be wrong. And I think social media encourages people to
speed over
accuracy. And I think that's a real flaw.
Jeff?
Well, I agree absolutely with what Jerry and Nick said. I have to do this with some humility because I'm a recovering Twitter addict. And you know, it's an incredibly enticing medium for wise asses, and most of us are wise asses, and we have quick reactions to things that are going on, and they're snarky and they're funny, or we think they're funny, and then we put it out there and we find that it's not funny. And so the temptations are overwhelming, but we don't have a policy, and maybe we should have a policy. My feeling is, if you have to tell people that you're always representing your news organization, no matter where you are, on TV, on Twitter, or whatever, and you have to remind them to behave professionally, then maybe they shouldn't be with your news organization.
And Nancy, you know, I was wondering, what would reporting look like today if, say, for example, Mitt Romney were president? Is objectivity possible when you're covering a president as unconventional as Donald Trump? And how do you separate his personality from his policies, his behavior from his leadership? And what kind of challenges has that posed for your organization in general?
Well, I think one of the ways in which he was so unconventional is one of the things that made him fascinating and made him appeal to an unprecedented coalition of voters who elected him, was because you couldn't put him easily in an ideological box. That there were days where he sounded like he was to the left of Bernie Sanders, and there were days he sounded like he was to the right of Ted Cruz, and it was not, in terms of, to the extent that people had an understanding of what policies they were voting for in voting for him, it didn't fit into any kind of a tidy package, and nothing that we have seen since then either. You know, when he is the one who talks about wanting a health care bill with heart, he continues to defy any kind of ideological labeling, any kind of obvious kind of traditional, this is a mainstream establishment Republican, this is a social conservative Republican, or any of the taxonomies that we've used before. I actually think that is one of the reasons why he has been such an object of fascination and surprise, because you cannot predict where he is going to come down on a certain policy with any kind of certainty.
Do you believe that so much reporting on his tweets, so much reporting on his behavior, whether Melania held his hand, and all the things that seem to be the focus of so much attention, and legitimately, I think, questions about Russia, but I think there was one study that said 55% of network news stories were now on Russia since Bob Mueller was appointed. But how concerned are you that other important news stories and policy issues are being ignored? And Joanne, that's something you and I have talked about. I mean, that is something that Sarah Sanders said yesterday, which I thought, you know, rang true in terms of what the media is covering.
We see it every day. So yes, people want to jump on the latest Trump tweet, but there are so many other important issues that affect people every day. And this is one of the reasons why Trump was elected in the first place, is for people who felt like the issues they care about were being ignored. I mean, you know, for us, one of the major issues we see across the country in all of our properties is immigration, because immigrants make up the core in so many different ways. I mean, in Iowa, where we have properties, immigrants are the majority of doctors in the rural areas. In Kentucky, they're the majority of the horse trainers and the guys who work with the horse breeders. So, you know, in New York, where we have properties, they're in the agriculture. So this is an issue that works across the country. Everybody is interested in this. When we write about it, it pops. People care. And there are so many of these other issues that very often get squeezed out.
We're almost out of time. There's so much more I want to talk about, but let me go down the line because Frank Luntz asked reporters this question, and I'm going to go down the line and ask you. Of the 20 people you see every day, you interact with, your friends, your family, your coworkers, how many of them voted for Donald Trump? Jeff?
0. Nancy?
Yeah, I think not many, and that's something I remind our newsroom of a lot, that the environment that they are operating in and living in is not a demographically accurate mirror of the country.
Nick?
We may be the exception as a business network, but I wouldn't say half, but probably pretty close.
Pretty close to half?
If I count friends, family, I have my wife here and her family in Ohio, and I work at a business network, and a fair number of people. So probably not half, but probably a little under that.
Joanne?
Actually, there's a few among our close friends and family, and I actually really try to spend some time talking with them and understanding and making sure. We had a very interesting Thanksgiving, I will tell you that. But it was civil, a lot of liquor, but very civil.
How many, though, out of 20?
I would say a minority, but there are a few.
Oh, wait,
Jerry?
Katie, I'm sorry, I forgot my Uncle Marty. I'm sorry.
Jerry?
Let me see. There was Ivanka, Jared. I think they both voted for Trump. Actually,
You hang out with them every day?
I'm like Nick, and I think this is an important point, and Frank's point is a very good one. Of course, most of the people in the media don't move in those circles. For a business newspaper, there was a lot of support for Donald Trump among CEOs. I'd say, and among a lot of the people that we know, I'd say less than half, but more than a quarter.
But I think Frank...
It gets to the, like Jerry and I deal with business a lot, that the undercovered story, for example, in business, there are few CEOs here. No one really talks about deregulation. No one talks about that effect on business because, it's interesting to business people. It's not necessarily interested to a wider world.
Yeah, I was at a dinner in Chicago last night with 12 CEOs. The topic of Russia and Mueller and the inquiry, literally in an hour and a half, didn't come up once. They talked about healthcare, deregulation, the economy, taxes, foreign policy more generally. This specific, and by the way, it wasn't like they were hostile or rather supportive of Trump. It just didn't come up. It just wasn't seen as an issue.
I think Frank's point of view is how can you really cover Trump voters if when you're separated from them? Pauline Kael of the New Yorker, after Nixon's landslide in 1972, famously said she didn't know how that was possible because nobody she knew voted for Nixon. So I guess the question is, how can media outlets be more representative of the readers they're serving? Part of it is, reminds me of that Atlantic article, shameless plug once again for the Atlantic, Jeff, but it was basically about how coastal cities have left the heartland behind. I think that was the title of that article. But, we've read about The Guardian, who's kind of going to local reporters because so many local newspapers have folded, reaching out to reporters all across the country. How can we be less insulated and more reflective of the concerns of Americans everywhere?
Just a quick intervention. The important question for me as an editor now is not whether I'm meeting Trump voters in Washington, D.C. I have reporters out there every day who 100% of the people they're meeting with, the Trump voters, and that's the metric that I would use to judge whether we're actually trying hard enough to listen.
Yeah, the important thing is the boots on the ground. I mean, like I said, we're half red and half blue, and also, if you look at, there was a census figure that something like 1 in 5 reporters, journalists, is based on in the coast, New York, D.C., or L.A. So we crunched the numbers, and we were something like 1 in 38. The vast majority of our reporters are on the ground in those areas, and you've got to be that. You can't be parachuting in. It doesn't work to parachute into these communities. You really have to be embedded and understand.
And this
them.
seems to be a bit of a self-correction, with all due respect. I mean, during the campaign, I think we weren't hearing those voices nearly as much as...
We did. With the Wall Street Journal, we went out and we reported, and we did, I think, a better job, I would say it myself, of reporting on the conditions, the economic, political, social, cultural factors that led to Trump. But obviously what people need to do is to get out of New York and LA and Washington and come to places like Aspen, where they can really get in touch with Middle America.
Hashtag the Heartland.
I think we have an absolutely representative audience here, and I'm such a pleasure to be.
We only have time for one more question, but tomorrow's the 10th anniversary of the iPhone, and these days, as we said, anyone can claim to be a journalist or reporter without any experience, without editors, without any standards. Fake news can come to the guy down the street or from some guy in Russia. So should there be something like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval that can signal to readers or viewers that certain protocols are followed and standards are upheld, or is that just a crazy idea?
There's actually an answer to that in technology, and that's where I would really love to see Facebook and Google in particular stepping up. And I know that both companies are looking into this because there are ways, what we see is so determined by the algorithms that they create. And what's in your newsfeed is Facebook has figured that out with an algorithm that surfaces these things. There is and should be, and I know that there's some work being done around this, the ability for those to use technology to weed out false information and to push up in your search results or your newsfeed information that is legitimate.
Anybody else?
I'm a little nervous about the idea of 23-year-olds in Mountain View, California, deciding what's true or not.
They already do.
I know they already do, but I think the best. First of all, you're not going to herd a bunch of cats in media to sort of accept a one sort of seal of approval. I think the thing to do for the smart consumer is to go to tried and true outlets that over time have proven themselves to be trustworthy and become loyal to those outlets. And I think eventually the truth will. I believe that the truth will out. You can't live a life if you're in finance, if you're in tech. You can't be successful if you adhere to a fake set of facts. And I think that the truth at the end of the day will win. I do.
Having said that, what about looking at news outlets that may have different ideological bents so that you can kind of see there may not be alternate facts, but there are different interpretations of any given set of facts, right?
So people should subscribe to the Weekly Standard, and they should subscribe to The Nation, and they should, you can't make the consumer more interested than the consumer wants to be, but you can encourage people to, and we are in a golden age because people are reading more than ever, and people aren't more engaged. It is an inadvertent outcome of the previous election, the last election.
And that's going to have to be the last word, or they're going to kill me. So thank you all so much. Thank you.